All right. Another episode of Confessions of a Street Broker. My dog. AC.
You got a lot of dogs.
I got a lot of dogs. But we were pretty much roommates
down there in Empire Central.
Down on Empire Central.
Yep.
Adam Curran, Holt Lunsford, managing principal.
Yep.
Do you remember when my business card said vice principal?
Vice principal, yeah. I literally laughed when I got this offer because I was like, man, there were a lot of vice principals back in the day.
Yeah.
At Mercer Co.
Yeah. So I didn't ever understand titles for commercial real estate, and I always thought they were stupid and didn't know what principal meant. So I was like, I'm going to be the vice principal.
Yep.
I also wanted to be I also wanted to have one that said guidance counselor. It's kind of what we are, right?
A lot of that.
It's a definite guidance counselor.
A lot of psychology and why did they do this and why did they offer that?
Yeah.
What are they thinking? Like, I don't know what they're thinking.
So somehow I got that on my business card, though. I had vice principal on there, and I handed it out to everybody. And eventually, I guess HR Gold took over, and they're
like, hey, man, we need to put a stop to this.
We need to get some real titles on these people. But I got away with it for like 2 years, I think. So.
Yep. You did. You did. You were the pioneer of nomenclature at Mercer Company.
I remember the first time Jeff, when Jeff was at Robert Lynn, I was like at his house one day and I saw one of his cards that said vice president. I was like, damn, this dude's already the vice president of this company. And then, you get in the business and everyone's a vice president and, oh, he's a VP. I'm like, okay, he works there.
My father-in-law's got a similar story. Like the 70s, he went to work for Henry S. Miller, and day one, he's vice president. His mom is like calling everybody, and hey, my son's a vice president of this company. It just started. You had to tell her, no.
There's like
everybody.
I need like a flow chart of like titles, like first vice president, senior vice president, and all this stuff.
And it's different in every shop. I mean, I was at Cushman, it was all production related. So you hit certain production titles. So you'd have 20-year-old kids that quote outrank some of the guys that have been there for 50 years. Right. They hit a big pop and had a good year. And a lot of vice chairmen that are like, man, you guys are all on the board of this 50,000 employee company. No.
Managing directors. It's always been funny to me, the titles in commercial real estate. So, it's funny you're talking about back on Empire Central. Do you remember, I felt like you and I were on that one side. And it was probably like 2,500, 3,000 feet. And it was just me and you.
Yeah. The annex.
The annex.
You listening to Meshuggah and jamming out.
We just had those two offices right next to each other, just sitting there. So
you listen to that one song, The Verve, on repeat over and over again.
Yeah, Bittersweet Symphony. It's funny, I was listening to that this morning on the way to, I was taking my daughter to volleyball tryouts, taking Layla in there, and I was like, hey, this is always a good commercial real estate song. And I don't know, Jeff and I always kind of thought of that as a commercial real estate song. You're a slave to money till you die. And, I remember the first time I really got into that song, I was dating this girl in college, and I went on the ski trip with her, and we broke up on the ski trip, and she was sending me back. We were driving back she was driving me to the airport. And her and I were just listening to this and ripping cigs the whole time.
You broke up before the drive?
Yeah. It was kind of ending before I got to the trip, but we'd already booked it. So we were like, so we were already kind of plot committed. But yeah, no, I love that song. It's a fun song. I always cover it when I play acoustic sets for people and stuff. I'll cover it and all that. I love that song. So
I always knew when you were listening to that, you were in a pensive mood.
Yeah.
90% of the time it's Meshuggah or Megadeth or Pantera.
Yeah. So that's what so I don't know if I haven't shown you this, but this is my Pantera homage.
Nice.
So
some new ink.
Yeah. So that's the Vulgar Display of Power album, Far Beyond Driven, the skull with the drill going through the top, the rattlesnake, Great Southern Trimkill, Cowboys from Hell in the back. Pray for me, Adam. And I got this done yesterday. I'm getting it done. This is going to be all the guitar. You can't really see it right now, but this is all lightning bolts right here going through it, and then that's where dime bag had signed my arm.
I remember the dime bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was about 4 hours of just pure
pain.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. They have numbing cream, and we used some numbing cream yesterday, but I mean, after about hour 3, it's like,
then it wears off.
Yeah, it wears off. And I was trying to finish yesterday, and he was like, we were 4 hours in. I was like, how much more you got? He's like, hour and a half. And I was like, dog, I ain't got it. He goes, that's fine. He goes, I'm good too. Like,
that's funny. They ever put people under?
I have seen that like they will put people under, and they'll have like 4 artists come in and like full sleeve a leg.
Man.
Like,
you'd have to put me under.
You'd have to. Yeah. You couldn't take it, man. Yeah. It's there's certain parts of your body too that are just. I mean, this part of your arm is absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And right here was terrible.
Really?
Just on the top of my shoulder. It's terrible.
I can see that.
So, and it bled like crazy. It just was bleeding and then it bled for like a day and a half after that. It just kept just coming out. So.
That's why I don't have one, man. I'm not manly enough to take the pain.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do this. I just never got around to it, and I finally got around to it. So
yeah, it's awesome.
I'm in it now. So, well, let's just start with your story, man.
Sure.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Where's AC from?
AC grew up in Austin. My dad was in the Air Force before I was born, and so I was actually born in California. And
at an Air Force base?
At an Air Force base, yeah, called March Air Force Base. And then my sister was born 10 months after I was, so very, very close in age.
Yeah.
And we moved to Austin when I was like 4 years old. So my dad retired from the Air Force and moved us to Austin. Back in the early 80s, he was like, hey, this is not a great place to raise kids.
Yeah.
So moved us to Austin in 1984, I think, and that's where I grew up.
Yeah.
So,
what high school did you go to?
Lake Travis.
Yeah.
Yep. People always are like, "Oh, that's where Drew Brees went." I'm like, "No, he went to Westlake."
Westlake.
Yeah, we claim Baker Mayfield. I'd rather have Drew Brees, but they were terrible at football when I was there. It was a small 3A school.
Yeah.
Really involved in our church growing up, but church and family, community was kind of it. It was a 3A school, so like 200 kids graduated from.
Yeah, so pretty tight knit little group.
Yeah, doesn't really exist around here in Dallas unless you're like in a small private school.
Yeah,
or like really out, probably I don't know.
Yeah,
Gunther or somewhere out in the far suburbs, but yeah.
No, it's or inner city. It's crazy. Dallas Carter is like a 3A high school now. Is that not unbelievable?
Because there's so many people moving out of the district.
They're moving out of the district.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to go off subject here for a minute, but something just so interesting to me is like no one even knows who Dallas Carter is now as a football program.
Yeah.
And there's like movies made about them.
Yeah, probably a lot of former pro players played there.
Yeah. I played, so I got to play them every year as our first round of the playoffs.
Oh, really?
And I played them in the Cotton Bowl, and I played them in Texas Stadium.
Man.
One of the teams we played had 23 guys sign letters of intent off of it.
Wow. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyways.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yes. I mean, like 3A schools are. I mean, I think Graham's 4A, and that's a small town, you know. So
it was a lot like Graham, man. It was kind of just a lake community, and not a lot of like big subdivisions, master plan communities.
Yeah,
just kind of a lake town. It was fun.
Yeah. Did you go on the lake a lot?
We did.
Have a boat?
Yeah. No, my dad was anti-boat.
Smart.
Yeah.
I just got out of 2 boats.
Really?
I just took that whipping.
Yeah. My dad was like, hey, the 2 best days you own a boat are the day you buy it and the day you sell it.
Nothing is truer than that statement right there, sir.
Yep. He also liked to say it was a hole in the water into which one pours money. So it's like, yeah, that's probably why I've never owned one either.
That is right. Man, rent them. You can rent them, and it seems expensive, but owning them is brutal. Yeah, I did it. Yeah. Lost on that deal.
Yeah. So we just mooch off our friends and
very smart.
Go out with them, wherever they'd invite us. But grew up down there and really went K through 12, the same school. So never moved. Like, I'm still best friends with two guys I met first day of kindergarten, and just a really neat upbringing.
Awesome. Yeah. It's the dynamic of being able to grow up in one place and live there is, so like Tammany lived 22 places before her freshman year in high school.
Gosh, yeah.
So it's interesting because now our kids live all in one. We've lived under the same roof since Barrett was 5. We've only lived in 2 different places, so they probably don't really remember the first one that much. And it's interesting. Tammany loves it, but she's also the kind that would just get up and if I went to her one day and said, "Hey, let's just get up and move," she would be like, "Okay."
Really? Like even across the country? Like
even across the country. Like I don't think
San Diego
it's in a good way, she has this lack of attachment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like she'd be like, "Oh, I'll miss my friends, but I'll whatever." I always had to make new friends anyway, so like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was I could just tell in her, and and it's in her personality too. Like I can just
outgoing.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we've grown up in that, we've raised our kids in that dynamic, because that's what, Jeff and I lived in the same house forever.
Really?
And Jeff moved to our house when he was 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I like it. I like the growing up in one place.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It's my style.
So. Yeah, I never moved until I left high school, and I had to make new friends, and I was like, I don't even know how to do this.
Right.
I was at such a loss. I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make new friends. I don't know how to introduce myself, you know, because it was, not like Dallas schools where there's people moving in and out, very transient.
Right.
But, if there's a new kid, everyone knew who they were day one. It's like, hey, where'd you move from? It wasn't a lot of.
There's like a circle around in the play yard.
Hey,
okay, all right, let's get your bio, your stats.
Let me see your baseball cards.
Yeah.
So a lot of that. Yeah. Not a lot of people moving, and it was great for me. Yeah. So
no, that's cool. So then after high school, you go to the Bears,
the Sikkim Bears, Baylor University. Yeah. So all growing up, I thought I wanted to go in the ministry. I was really involved in our church, and when I was 6 years old, funny story, I told my parents I wanted to be a pilot and a preacher when I grew up.
Yeah.
Which looking back, I'm like, man, that is so young, so young. But my parents divorced when I was in middle school, and then there were a whole bunch of kind of traumatic things that happened as a result of that. And so I think that really kind of helped me solidify, like, hey, I think I really do want to go in the ministry,
And do you think because of all the traumatic things that God was always your refuge in that, and that just kind of, you kind of could go surrender to that? And
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he was, when things are falling apart at home and you don't know where to turn. And, my dad and I always had a great relationship, but things with my mom were strained, and, but church was always, it was a literal sanctuary, like there's a reason that word is used for the worship centers, because it's the sanctuary. And I would go there and just feel, my buddies were there, Bible study teachers were there. And so I just really felt at home at church. And I always felt close to God. I, feel like I've been a believer my whole life. And so that was a big part of my childhood, still is a big part of my life. But so when it came time to choose colleges, 17, 18 years old, I had a youth minister that had graduated from Baylor and really looked up to him. And, growing up in Austin, there's either go to UT or you go to ACC to try to get into UT.
Yeah.
Or you go to, it was Southwest Texas back then, now it's Texas State. But there wasn't a school in Austin that had a religion or theology degree. You could go to St. Edward's, but we weren't Catholic. And Baylor was the closest, the biggest, the best of my options. And my dad, who was a mailman all growing up after the Air Force, I was like, I don't know if I can get in, and I don't know if we can pay for it. But my dad was like, hey, if you get in, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We'll figure out a way to pay for it.
It's not a cheap school.
No. It's not cheap today. It wasn't cheap back then. And so it was awesome. So I graduated high school as one of 4 from my graduating class to go to Baylor.
Yeah.
Like 40% of my graduating class went to UT, which is, that whole friend group just went to UT, and they just kind of carried on their their friendships. But I went to Baylor. You were talking about breaking up with your girlfriend. I'd just broken up with my girlfriend, and we were listening to a lot of Goo Goo Dolls back then.
Yeah.
She would play this. We were breaking up one time, and she was playing the Goo Goo Dolls song, where it's like, "I just want you to know who I am," on repeat. I was like, "This is so dramatic,"
So you never listened to me.
You never listened to me. I'm like, I'm listening now. This song is on repeat over and over again.
Are you trying to tell me something?
Yeah, I'm like, are you trying to tell me something about who you are? So left Baylor. I left my dad. My dad and I were really close. I didn't have a big friend group when I went to Baylor. And so my freshman year, man, was just awful. Really, the first semester was just awful. I never, like I said, never had to make new friends. And I was in a place where everyone was like a guitar player and everyone's top of their class and everyone's good looking and good at good at sports, And I was like, man, what am I doing here? But, my girlfriend and I had broken up. And so it really took me a full semester to kind of just feel settled. I think I got like a 2.3 GPA. I made 1 A, 3 C's, and a D. And my only A was in Spanish, which is funny. But for some reason, I just always retained Español.
Yo hablo español.
Un poquito. Tengo que practicar. So then a buddy of mine transferred into Baylor from where we grew up, and we had been friends since second grade. And he came back that spring semester and transferred in, and he was like, "Hey, man, let's rush a fraternity." And I was like, "Man, I don't think so. I don't think it's for me." Growing up in Austin, you'd see all the UT fraternities come out to the lake and party their faces off. And I'm like, man, you got to pay to be a part of that? And you're drunk all the time? But I was pretty desperate for a friend group. And I had some good buddies that were neighbors, and we'd hang out, but just didn't have a whole lot in common. And so he came, and we rushed, and I didn't make grades again my second semester. So then I rushed again I rushed in the fall of my sophomore year, and then didn't get in until my spring of my sophomore year. And that kind of changed my experience at Baylor. I had some good friends that made through that. And
I think a lot of people experience they go to a 4-year university. There's like a moment where you're like, what am I doing? I don't want to be, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. I experienced that. I think a lot of people have. And then you end up being like, that's exactly where I was supposed to be.
Really hard first year. You're like, man, stick it out. I was super homesick. Like I said,
and you weren't even that far from home.
No.
An hour and a half drive.
2 hours max. Drive home on a weeknight if I wanted to. And but still, when you're in college, you're like, that 2 hours feels like.
Well, 2 hours back then seems like a 7-hour road trip now. Like 2 hours is like nothing.
Nothing like Lubbock to Irving.
Was that
6,
that was
7
5.
hour
It was right at 5 if you didn't stop.
Okay.
So
not too much to come home just for the weekend. Probably.
No, you didn't. Lubbock is 5 hours from anything. So like Lubbock is a true island. You have to be like, any direction you go, it's 5 hours to anything. So I always felt bad for the kids that lived in Houston because that was like an 8 or 9 hour drive.
Oh yeah, from Lubbock.
That's where Tammany had to go all the time. Like,
man, probably before there was cheap Southwest flights.
Well, you could get on Southwest decent sometimes, but like, and they always had a flight. But I mean, it's just like, but like if you wanted to go do anything, like it's flat West Texas. I know. It's very near and dear to my heart. Now, if you wanted to bird hunt, it was legit. Like you could.
I bet there's good deer hunting too, probably.
Deer hunting, all the hunting out there is actually pretty good. So, but skiing 5 hours, But that was also closer than any other Texas school to go skiing. So we go skiing on the weekend.
Like Ruidoso and
Ruidoso, Red River, and so So, all right. So you get in your fraternity.
Get in the fraternity. Then
what fraternity were you in?
It's called Fiji.
Okay.
It's Phi Gamma Delta.
Yeah. They're
national.
pretty big national fraternity. They got a pretty good presence at Tag. So.
And I had like I said, I had no idea. My dad was not in a fraternity. He wasn't even a college grad. So kind of everything that I did was just new frontier, But there were a couple of guys in the fraternity that were older that had graduated from the same high school. So I felt like I kind of had, all right, I know these couple guys and
a little familiarity there.
Yeah. And so, I got in the spring of my sophomore year. And at the end of my sophomore year, I went back home and did an internship with the church that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just let go the pastor that I grew up with. And so my plan was to go, and I was still in the kind of ministry track, and plan was to go back and live at home and do this internship. And then they hired a new pastor, and he came in and was really just discipling me all summer, and we're doing Bible studies together. And about halfway through the summer, he's like, hey, why do you think you're called to the ministry? And man, you probably remember this story, but Jeremy, I was like, I got no clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it freaked me out, man. I was like, oh my gosh, if I can't answer this question, if I don't feel like this deep burning desire to go do it, and I can't even like formulate a response, and what am I supposed to do? And so finished the internship, went back to college and changed my major to aviation science. I went and looked at like all the other majors. I was like, well, when I was 6, I said I wanted to be a pilot and a preacher. Yeah. So maybe I'm supposed to be a pilot.
Yeah.
You know? My dad was in the Air Force, and went back to Baylor and changed my major. I even thought about transferring out because I'm like, what am I doing here, spending all this money on school or borrowing every dime to live? And I always had to work part-time. So I'm like, man, I could go, if I'm just going to get a degree, I could go somewhere that's
more
a tenth of the cost. Yeah. So I'm just struggling with the reality of it, and struggling with, it's funny now that they say your brain's not fully developed until you're 25, and all the pressure that you put on yourself as a 20-year-old, I got to figure this out right now, So anyways, I went back to Baylor and changed my major. I was looking at the list of majors available. There's an aviation science major, and I was like, sweet, I'll go be a pilot. Maybe I heard that calling correctly,
Yeah.
You go back to school, and I spend a whole year doing that program. And the program's amazing, but it's super intense. It's like 145 hours. And they had an agreement with TSTC in Waco. And so you'd go over there and you'd take your flight lessons, and then you'd come back to Baylor and take all these crazy, ridiculous computer science classes and stuff even pilots today probably be like, that you'll never use that.
You'll never use
that. But on top of tuition, you had to pay for your flight fees on top of that. So now I'm like borrowing even more money for these flight fees, and flight training back there was not cheap, and $5,000 a semester on top of tuition. And so into my junior year, I'm like, man, I'm way behind this program. I'm even further in student loan debt, and I just need to change my major back to religion just to graduate in 5 years or less. And I still didn't really have like what I sensed was a calling, from the Lord or anything, but didn't know what I wanted to do. So, but wisdom kind of sat in and changed my major. And then that summer, I had a couple of other fraternity brothers that did this program that was selling books door to door.
Mm-hmm.
And the company's called Southwestern Company, and they've been around for 150 years. And they used to sell Bibles door to door, but they still today, even 25 years later, they still have people go door to door and sell books. But my fraternity brother, who was like a hard-charging top sales guy, he was number one of all the first years in the whole company. So like 3,000 people go out as a first year from all over the country, all of college students, and go to different territories. And he was number one. He made like $20,000 one summer, in 2002.
Yeah.
So I don't know, $75,000 today.
Yeah.
I made a crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, just give me a tenth of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I trained with him all summer or all semester leading up to the summer. And then I set out to go do their program. And I lasted about 5 or 6 weeks. And then my dad got diagnosed with cancer. Mm-hmm. And so I came home. So I quit the program, came home, and picked up an odd job here or there. But it was amazing sales experience, amazing cold call experience.
Yeah.
It's probably like football, man. You can sit there and read all the playbooks you want, but unless you're out there tackling and running the plays, you're not really doing it. And this was like, you're going to do it day one.
Yeah. Theory versus application.
Right.
And man, making calls on people's residences is, that's, I think never, as I think back on it, like we started chasing pre-foreclosures like right when I was out of college. So I was cold calling people that were getting foreclosed on at their front door of their house. And
stressful situation.
Man, it's, you have people cold calling your house these days, right? And I even try to like, okay, this guy's cold calling. I got to like give him, then I'm just like, oh man, get the hell out of here.
I always try to give him the time of day now because I'm like, man, I was there. I was doing what you're doing. I still do what you do. And,
I try to do that too, but then sometimes they're really pushy guys, and it's just like, all right, man, like, I gave you the time. I gave you like 3 signals that this ain't happening, and you didn't pick up on any of them. And so we're just going to shut the door.
See ya. A lot of that, man. A lot of doors shut in your face. A lot of like, hey, I'm going to call the cops. Didn't you see this sign at the front of the neighborhood? And no soliciting. And I've heard you say before on this podcast, like you just go make calls and that'll solve all your problems. But that was one thing they would train to. It's like, hey, is it raining? Go make calls because the person next door may hand you an umbrella.
Right.
It's like just the cold calling would just solve a lot of problems.
It does. It's cold calling. Sales cures all problems.
Yep.
Revenue generating activities cures all issues.
Yep. Tends to be the cure all for sure.
Yeah.
I did not finish the program, but I actually made some decent money for those 6 or 7 weeks I was selling. So came back, and then my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and then he went through radiation treatments. And around Thanksgiving of that year, he actually was cancer-free, which was awesome. So we thought we were in the clear.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go into my senior year in college, and towards the end of my senior year, he got sick again, just out of the blue. And he passed away right before the end of my senior year. Just awful.
Yeah.
And it was growing up, single dad. I tell people he was like my Atticus Finch, if you've read To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
But, just like the perfect dad. I mean, not without his faults. I mean, he would, if he were sitting here today, he would tell you this, but he was a recovering alcoholic but never abusive. He was always home. He got clean when I was around 12. And I think that's when he became a Christian. And so when he passed away, it was like my whole world had collapsed,
Yeah.
And, but I had, right before that, started dating my now wife. And, this is a cool story, but I called him right before he passed away. And I had no clue that he was kind of on death's door, and had been on a date with my now wife. And, senior year in college, she pretty girl crazy at Baylor, just chasing girls. And, my dad was married 3 times. My mom was his 3rd wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was always like, man, just tap the brakes, slow down, you got the rest of your life. And but so I called him to tell him about Allison.
Yeah.
And he was like, man, that sounds like somebody you should pursue.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing, man. Get emotional sometimes, even thinking about it today, 20 plus years later. But
I feel like I knew your dad.
Yeah.
Because you talked about him so much.
Yeah.
But I never met him.
Never met him. Yeah.
But I'd heard so many things about him and him raising you and how much impact he had on your life.
Yeah.
So
it was huge, man. He was very sacrificial, just really modeled the love of Christ and was a studious man of the word, and, modeled scripture reading and modeled just the sacrifice in the home. And he didn't make much money at all. I mean, he was a mailman, like I said, but just, it was always kids first, family first. And, I still think about the sacrifices he made today that not only got me to where I'm at, but helped me with my own kids, where I'm like, man, what would Jim Curran do in this situation? But,
yeah.
But it was, I thank God for the 22 years I had with him. But,
yeah. No, that's, didn't you make like a little endowment too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you working on that.
Yeah.
So
that was a cool story. So anyways, and I can fast forward to that story, but when he passed away, I've got a lot of amazing financial stories from him. But when he passed away, he used to joke like, "Hey man, I'm worth more dead than alive because I've got this life insurance policy." And I was like, "Dad, it's so morbid.
Yeah.
We need you." But he passed away, and I got this. It was enough of a life insurance check to like maybe be like, "Man, what should I do with this?"
Yeah.
It was not enough to like never have to work again, or even to go without, a year without working really.
Yeah.
But I felt like, man, at 22, my dad was like, here's a check. Like he personally handed it to me, And it was almost the exact amount of money that I owed on student loans.
Oh, wow.
When I graduated. And just an unbelievable provision from him, from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a culmination of him going, hey, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out,
Yeah.
And I can get into the gospel, but it's like him paying the debt that I had is the same as what Jesus has done for us. And anyways, just another amazing sacrifice. But anyway, so but I had a mentor that was like, hey, maybe your interest rate on the student loan is like 1.3%. The interest is tax deductible, and you can pay it off over 25 years. So maybe you don't pay it off right away. So I was like, man, maybe I could do something like that's kind of a risk, to use it to get in the commercial real estate business. And we can back up to that story. But about 10 years later, I had a good year, and I was like, man, I really want to do something that honors my dad. And so we set up an endowed scholarship at Baylor that was the same exact amount of money that his death provided for.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's cool. They don't let you get involved in like the scholarship selection. Yeah, because they want it to be, I guess the IRS is like, hey, you got to have it
arm's length.
Yeah. But they said you can put some stipulations on it. And I was like, all right, well, I don't want it to be too restrictive because I want it to be available. And so I said, can we make it to like the student of a single parent or the student of somebody who has some sort of civic service, policeman, fireman, military? And they're like, hey, that's perfect. And so it's awesome. We get a letter every year because one of the conditions of the scholarship is the recipients have to send a letter to the donors, especially the named donors of the endowment. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing. I just get a letter every year from a student, and it's just a cool thing. It's just kind of a ripple effect for what his death is continued.
The pay it forward thing.
Yeah, just kind of what he's continued to do for people. It's pretty awesome.
Well, there's someone else awesome in your life.
Yeah.
Allie.
Yeah.
How'd y'all meet?
Yeah.
So she was, because I feel like it's similar to me and Tammany in a way. So.
Yeah. She's a year younger. So her sophomore year, my junior year, she was in a sorority, and her roommate was in a different sorority. And so her roommate invited me to this function. And so I go pick up her roommate, and then Allie comes downstairs to take pictures of us. You're in a formal tuxedo that you rented from Men's Warehouse for $30 and just a cheap suit. And she came down the stairs, and I was like, man, your roommate's pretty cute. I didn't say this to my date, but yeah, I was like, man, she's beautiful. And she took our picture. And so we didn't immediately hit it off that night, but then the next semester we had an English class together, and the Lord just kind of kept continuing to cross our paths, And we were kind of friends at first. She took me to one of her functions, and then 3 or 4 months later, I called her and took her to one of our fraternity formals, and the night that we had our first date was the night that I called my dad. We went to Johnny Carino's in Waco. Had some $12 Italian food.
Ours was on the border in Lubbock. That was our first date. Yeah.
It was funny. I was like, man, if I spend more than $10 on a meal for me and for her, I'm really living large.
Yeah. This is getting serious.
This is getting real serious, yeah. Because there was a Fazoli's in Waco. It's like $4. You could buy this Italian sampler thing. And you could stand in line, and they would give you free breadsticks. So as a college kid, you could go fill yourself up for like $4. Like, man, we can't go to Fazoli's. That's too cheap. Let's go to Johnny Carino's. So that was our first date. And then this is amazing too. That summer that my dad had passed away, my plan was to stay in Waco and just take some summer classes to kind of get ahead of graduation, and because I was still behind from the major change. And she had an internship in Austin with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and so she had already planned to be in Austin. We were almost already saying our goodbyes for her to move down there. And then when my dad passed away, I was like, well, I gotta move back home to Austin to take care of all this stuff. So I'm the oldest of three, so I had to take care of all of his, finances, what little there were, but it was a gigantic mess. He didn't have a will. He had the life insurance policy, but there were no beneficiaries, and he had kids from other marriages. I mean, it was a gigantic mess, And now, like, my estate, I feel like is
tight,
ironclad, because I'm like, if I die, I want you to make one phone call, and then all these hundreds things happen automatically, But so I went home, and I moved in with some family friends that are actually a part of my real estate entry story. My best friend from high school, he went to A&M. I went to Baylor, and he and I were always kind of tracking on the same collegiate paths. He joined a fraternity, and I did as well. And we'd come home and hang out, over Christmas break. And his parents quickly became kind of second parents to me. His dad, the day that my dad passed away, his dad stood in my bedroom and was like, "Hey, we'll do whatever it takes to get you through this." And it was amazing. He literally paid for my dad's funeral, and he said, "When you get the life insurance money, you can just pay me back." I mean, just an amazing provision. So I lived with them for that summer, and Allie would go do her work at the Make-A-Wish Foundation from 8 to 5, and then I would kind of close the books on what I was doing for my dad for the day, and we'd hang out and just enjoy, a summer together. So it was the best of times and worst of times. I mean, I was grieving my dad, but it was like, again, the Lord providing, like, hey, here's this new relationship that
get you through this.
And then that summer, so halfway through the summer, I was like, hey, I just want to tell you something that you don't have to say it back to me, but I really want to tell you. And she's like, what? And I was like, I love you. And she goes, thank you. And I was like, I know I said that you didn't have to say it back, but I was kind of hoping you would. Oh, it's funny, man.
That's what, so Tammany did that to me. She's like, hey, I love you. And I was like, thanks. It's funny, like your dad told you, don't get in a relationship yet. Mm-hmm. Like when I met Tammany, I was on this, I am not getting any relationships. I'm going to date as many girls as I can right now. And I met her, and I was like, that night, I was like, damn it, I'm going to marry this person. Yeah. Like, this is end game right here.
Didn't one of her friends, send you, a message or something? You, were at a party, and she came over to you, and hey, my friend thinks you're cute.
Yeah, her friend Jill was like, hey, I went outside the garage to, smoke a cigarette or something. She was like, hey, my friend thinks you're really cute. And so I went back in there and started talking to her, and it was, we were at a house party, and she was like, you're not drinking? I was like, I turned 21 in 10 days, and the cops will be here at some point.
Don't want to risk it.
Don't want to risk it. And she's like, oh, when's your birthday? And I was like, told her it's December 20th. She goes, well, that's my birthday.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Y'all have the same exact birthday.
I was like, oh, okay. And then she's 2 hours older than me.
Man,
so
that's funny. And then I forgot about that.
Then there was all these weird things. And I was like, well, let me get your phone number. And our phone numbers, I didn't have a cell phone. This was like a house, your apartment phone.
Yeah.
And my phone number was 555-1234. Hers was 555-1235. Really? It was one number apart.
Wow.
Just all these little nuances. Her mom thought I was a stalker. Then I was like, well, where do you live? She goes, I live in these apartments. I was like, I live in those apartments.
They literally making all this stuff up.
Yeah, my apartment building's here. Hers was right here. It was just all these little things. But
it's awesome, man.
It's funny when you meet that person, and she told me that, and I was like, I was just trying to be hard. I was like, I don't want to commit.
Yeah.
I'm so in.
Stay cool. Yeah, I really want to tell you the same thing.
Yeah. So, but here we are 25 years later, so
it's awesome, man.
But, that's, so you and Allie are hanging out in the summer. You go back to Baylor, finish up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had, again, still I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And when I went back to Baylor to graduate, I wasn't really wrestling with the Lord anymore, and wasn't like, hey, do you want me to go in the ministry? And I wouldn't say that I was mad at him, but I was super apathetic. I was like, just, can I go do anything else?
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that release. I know it sounds weird to say that, but And I counsel some young guys now through our church, and a lot of people are asking the same questions I was 25 years ago that we all probably were. And I'm like, man, if you don't feel like a major pull towards something, there's nothing wrong with going to do something and then pivoting to find your passions,
Yeah.
And so I had that sales internship, and every single one of my fraternity brothers, everybody's dad was in commercial real estate.
Everyone's from Kevin Collins.
Yep. Had another fraternity brother who was he had graduated, so he was the president when I was pledging, and I really looked up to him, and he was doing office tenant rep at NAI. I think it was Huff, Browse, McDowell back then. So the NAI Dallas office, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And also my wife, her dad was in real estate, and then my best friend from high school, his dad was buying rental homes, and he showed me, he was like, hey, read this book, and it was called The Unofficial Guide to Real Estate Investing, super cheesy, but I was like, that's genius.
Like, do you remember the cold calling book we had?
Yeah,
the
Idiot's Guide to Cold Calling.
It was just like,
I still have them all.
Cold calling, the guy's like sitting there.
Yep. Landline, tie on.
Yeah.
Still have all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just a big nerd, loved to read. So I read the book, and then he was like, hey, here's how I make money on these rental houses. I got the rental income, I got the cash flow from the tenants, and then the mortgage is paid down, and then I get the market if it goes up. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And but I was like, I don't want to do residential real estate. I don't want to be working nights and weekends.
Yeah.
And didn't want to be sitting in open houses on Sunday from 1 to 3 and just
baking cookies to make the house smell good.
Yeah. What brings you in today?
Yeah.
Just I couldn't see myself doing that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, it wasn't a big calculus to it at all. I was like, man, if I'm going to go sell something, I would love to sell something that has a lot of zeros and commas to it.
Right.
If you're going to cold call, I'm kind of like, man, why sell copiers when you can cold call on bigger stuff, bigger paydays. And so I had this buddy, he was doing office tenant rep here in Dallas, and he would set me up. He'd give me a list of like dozens of people to call on. So I just started cold calling them the summer right after I graduated. Moved back home after graduation just to get my real estate license. And I was like, I'm just going to sit here all day and bang the phones and try to set meetings in Austin and Dallas. Allie had, of course, she had 2 interviews, and they both were like, when can you start? And so she had already had a job in Dallas. So I knew I wanted to be up here. She grew up here. And so I'd call these people, and almost everybody would meet with you, but you quickly find out like, oh, we're not really hiring. I'm like, man, I drove 4 hours from Austin, Then I was like, well, maybe I should ask him if they're hiring before I set the meeting. Finally got smart. And so halfway through the summer, Kevin Conlon and I were always good buddies and still are. And he was like, hey, I got somebody I want you to meet. I was like, all right, well, who is it? And he said, his name's Mark Miller. He's with NAI, Robert Lynn.
Yeah.
And I went in and met with Mark, and I still was like, I want to do office tenant rep. And again, my buddy who was doing it, he was like, why would you ever even consider industrial? Those are $3 gross rents, and the rents in office are $40 a foot, and you get paid on the rents, and just do the math. And I'm like, yeah, it does kind of sound stupid, when you break it out like that.
Yeah.
And so Mark was the only interview I had that was an industrial guy.
Yeah.
And we had a great meeting. It was very short. At the end of the meeting, though, I was like, hey, do y'all have an office tenant rep division? He's like, yeah, you can go meet with this guy over here. And so I met with that guy briefly, and then I called Conlon afterwards, and he was like, you are an idiot. If Mark offers you a job and you don't take it, don't ever call me again. So I was like, all right. So I called Mark the next day. I'm like, hey, Mark, if you're in, I'm in. I'm all in. I'll start tomorrow. And it was like August 10th. He's like, all right, well, you start September 1. And that was 2004. So it's almost, 20 years ago to the day.
Yeah.
So I moved up here. I moved in with some family friends in Colleyville, which is close to where Allie was from. And
who are your family friends?
The Coles. Do you remember Lynn and Henry Cole?
Yeah.
They were like friends with your parents,
people.
Yeah.
Irving.
Yeah.
Irving.
That was our other connection.
Yeah.
So the Hallrus.
The Hallrus.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you knew Paul Hallra.
Yep. And because Rebecca was Jeff's age.
Yeah.
And
yep.
Yeah, we used to go to the Hallras, like, they used to have I just remember they had a Halloween party every year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Remember they had a little Bob for Apples thing. That was a little kid. I'd be like,
yeah. So Paul and Rosie Hallra, Paul's brother Kent, is my mentor, family friend, kind of second father, and his son Scott and I are best friends from high school. So that was the connection.
The I-Town Connect.
The I-Town Connect. Yeah. Paul lived in Irving, and Paul gave me Jeff's number the same time, kind of right around the same time Conlon gave me Mark's number.
Yep.
And so I think I called Mark and then immediately hung up and called Jeff. And then Mark called me back, and then Jeff called me back, and I had set a meeting with Mark, and then Jeff called me, and Jeff was like, "Oh, if you're meeting with Mark already, you're good to go."
Yeah.
And but it was just like amazing.
Yeah.
You know? So I lived with the Coles out in Colleyville, and they had another house in like Winter Park or something. So they're like, "Hey, you can stay here rent free. We just need a warm body in the house just to make sure the house doesn't burn down." And
yeah.
So I lived there for 4 months, and was rubbing 2 nickels together, trying to get things going. But, I started with Mark September 1, 2004.
20 years, man.
Almost 20 years, yeah.
Like that.
I know. It's insane.
Yeah,
so I walk in day one, and I sit right next to Mark Miller on his right side, and then on my left side, I'm on Mark's right side, and then to the right of me is Jeff Mercer, your brother.
Yeah.
So I'm like flanked in between these 2 unbelievable producers that were
2 totally different types of personalities.
Totally different game plans, but both incredibly successful.
Yeah.
But I hit it off with both of them. I had a lot in common with Mark, had a lot in common with Jeff, and Jeff kind of took me under his wing too. He went to bat for me on a few commission battles early on that were pretty funny.
Yeah.
He just loved to stand up for his guys, and I was kind of endeared to him for that. I was like, man, this guy has no vested interest, and he gets nothing if I collect on this fee, except for the sense of justice that he wanted. Just I still tell people, I'm like, if you want someone to collect a fee, it's Jeff Mercer.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And probably you too.
Yeah. But I feel like I'm more the Mark Miller personality than Jeff. Where I don't want to call it like loosey goosey, but just kind of go with the flow type thing. But and that's kind of how I brokered, right? Like Jeff would probably have he'd probably go into Jeff's desk, and there's 10 signed tenant reps on the desk, and whatever. And I was like, I don't care if you sign it, I'll find you something.
Yeah. No, he was very methodical. He'd walk into, like you said, man, you walk in, his desk is completely clean. He was never frantic. He always had a plan.
Yep.
And he'd go to Mark Miller's office, and there's stuff everywhere. And it was back when we had limited minutes on our cell phones. Yeah. So he had 2 cell phones. So he had one that was the primary, and then on the day 15 of the month, he would run out of minutes, and then switch to his other one. And one was a Motorola Razr, and the other is a Palm Trio, and just man, the first 6 months, I was like, what in the world is happening? I would get in at 6 a.m. and he'd been there at 4.
Yeah.
And every morning he's like, look what the cat drug in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm barely here, man.
Yeah.
And 6 months into it, I'm like, man, can I get in at 6:30? Just that extra 30 minutes. It's
really going to be meaningful.
It's going to be meaningful. You're going to get a lot out of me, a lot more out of me. Yeah. But no, it was incredible, man. I worked for Mark for 5.5 years, and just another great model mentor, kind of like my dad. I mean, a guy who just really just walked the walk.
Yeah.
And, at the very tip top of his game, but was very humble and treated people. I still hear things about him. They're like, people think he's the nicest guy in real estate. And he really is.
He is.
I worked with him for 5 years and can attest to all of it.
I don't feel like I've ever seen him lose his cool.
Yeah.
I feel like he's always.
Yeah. I saw him one time. And it was somebody who had gone after his character, integrity or something on a fee, and that made him go ballistic. And I was like, well, that would make all of us go ballistic.
But that guy's probably been screwed over so many times and just smiled and found a way around it or whatever. And,
So. Yeah, he's, man, also, like, people are like, what else was it like? I was like, well, obviously it was like hair on fire all the time, every day, you know, but he's also, man, to this day, one of the mentally toughest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, just like you said, just never, he'd lose a fee or something and get up and go after the next one, and just kind of like an A-Rod, you know, where you're like, man, we lost the World Series and I'm going to be in the training room the next day and just going to follow the plan.
Yeah.
So, but it was phenomenal. Man, I was running around all day, every day. I wasn't quite in the same NAI Robert Lynn program. Back then it was Robert Lynn Company. And and Jeff actually kicked me out of Action Group at one point because he's like, you're not making your calls. And I'm like, I know, I'm kind of at the beck and call of Mark on his showings. And we had like 4 million square feet of listings, with 40 different owners, you know, bunch of old business owners that had sold the building or sold the business and kept the building.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of educating landlords, and, you know, we didn't have a lot of institutional business. We did some stuff for Hillwood and Cabot, but for the most part, it was mom and pops. You know? So I'd run around and show buildings and was kind of his listing guy.
Yeah.
And, but like I said, man, it was, you know, you're just learning trial by fire.
Yeah.
You know? He was doing 100 deals a year, and I'm like, if I could just touch 20% of these, I'm going to learn a crazy amount in a short amount of time. And that's what happened. So,
So then you're on Mark Miller's team.
Yep.
And then 5.5 years. So this is about the time Jeff leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started in 2004. Jeff, he left in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I, this is funny too. He'd come in the office, and the other thing I really respected about Jeff and still do is his ownership prowess on the ownership side. You know, there was a guy, I can't remember his name, Chris Paris.
Oh yeah,
Chris would come to the office and drop off a commission check to Jeff, and he's in shorts and a t-shirt. Yeah. Chris Paris is.
Yeah.
And Jeff used to also be like, man, that's my hero. I was like, what do you mean? That guy's.
He looks like a plumber.
Yeah.
Like Chris Paris. Yeah. I mean, he does all of his own construction.
Really?
Yeah.
Is he still around at all?
He is. I sold a building I own to him 2 years ago.
Okay.
But he's just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
He still owns. He sold a couple things. So.
Yeah. So Chris came up to the office one time, and Jeff was like, "That's my hero." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Yeah. He's like, "Well, he goes, man, I want to be the guy writing the commission checks one day." And I'm like, that makes sense. You know, you'd rather be the building owner than the broker at the end of the day.
Well, it's like, have you ever heard that saying where they go like, LeBron's rich, but the guy that writes his check is wealthy?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, the Nike, Phil Knight is the,
who owns the Lakers?
Lakers,
you know, like that's,
you want to be the landlord, really, if you can. And so before Jeff had left, Jeff and Mark and I sat down, and they were kind of like, hey, this is 2007. And he was like, hey, if anybody finds a building and we can buy it and pull the money together, we'll buy it. And so right before he left, we had bought a building, and I think I put, $1,500 scraped together and put it in the building. So when he left the company, when he left Robert Lynn, we were still partners on that deal. I was like 1% of it, So he'd call in from Graham and, hey, how's it going on the building? And I was like, it's going good. But then we got sued.
The ADA.
Yeah.
I remember this. This is the 1-800-Flowers building, right?
Yeah, 1-800-Flowers. So on my birthday one year, I get a message from the receptionist. She's like, hey, someone's here to see you. And I was like, oh, man, it's my birthday. Maybe it's a singing telegram. Maybe it's flowers from Allie.
Nope, it's a process server.
It's a process server. So I walk out there, and he's like, hey, you Adam Curran? I said, yes, sir. I got a big smile on my face. I'm like, what have you got for me? He said, you're being served. And I was like, being served what? And he's like, sign here. I'm like, what am I signing? What am I being served with? And he goes, sir, you're being sued. And I was like, oh, my gosh.
That's got to be pretty daunting for someone
that age. 27, probably.
26,
27, scared out of my mind. Like, what does this mean? Am I going to jail?
I'll tell you a funny story real quick.
Yeah.
We got sued on a building for something. It's an insurance thing or whatever. And the process server could never catch me or whatever. And they finally called me, and I was like, "Oh, hey, yeah, what's up? I'm getting sued, because now I'm like, oh, whatever.
Now
it's
you know.
this
Is this Jeremy Mercer?
Yeah, and so I call Isabella and say, "Hey, listen, someone's going to show up, and you're going to have to sign something." I told them you're authorized to sign for it. We're getting sued, so just don't freak out.
Yeah.
She was like, "Thank you so much for telling me," because I could just imagine if the process server would have showed up and served her the lawsuit, she'd be like, like just not even able to breathe.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking, man.
It is.
It's like worst nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
But so we got through that. So that whole lawsuit, Jeff and I would just chat. And, and we were good friends before that. And I had gone out to the ranch a couple times and dove hunted with him. And he was kind of I joke, I'm like, where Mark was kind of my uncle, Jeff was kind of my big brother.
Yeah.
But which is funny too, because we're polar opposite.
Oh yeah.
Just completely different, but we always got along really well. And so when he left in 2008, we kept in touch. And then in 2010, he called and he was like, "Hey man, I'd really love for you to come over here and help me run the company and help me hire and train. And, you still can do brokerage and we'll run a plan together." And prior to that, Chad Albert had come in every summer and interned with us, who's Mark's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed working with Chad and kind of showing him the ropes. And, the only downside, there's downsides to everything, but the downside, I think, to brokerage is it's an individual sport.
Yeah.
I was on a team, but I really enjoyed working with Chad and kind of helping him see how things work. And he's been wildly successful since then. I'm not taking credit for it at all, but I really enjoyed working with him and kind of training him and discipling him. And so Jeff was like, "Man, can you come over and let's do this together?" And I was like, "Man, I'm in." And so I went over there. I think I started February of 2010.
Okay.
Yeah. So Boozer was there. Tim Wheeler quit the Friday that I was there. So we overlapped for like a week.
Yeah.
I think you had Michelle and Blair there.
Bob Kent. Was Bob Kent there?
No, Bob had already left. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he went to Structure Commercial. So he was already gone. But Bob had been in North Dallas.
Yeah.
And that was another thing too. Jeff was like, "Bob left and I've got his database and you can come do the same market." And I was like, "Man, that sounds awesome."
Yeah.
So joined in February of 2010 and started there. It was hard to leave Mark, but because I was like, "What am I doing, man? I'm leaving a known commodity." And I trusted Jeff. I knew he was going to be successful.
Yeah.
But we didn't have kids yet. I remember telling Allie, I'm like, "I'm leaving this 50-year-old company to go start with Jeff. He's only been there 2 years, and I think he's going to make it work, but I'm kind of burning the boat. I can't go back if it, I think Mark's going to fill my seat next week."
Yeah.
But no, I started February 2010, and it was kind of off to the races. So.
Yeah. Over on Empire Central. That's what Jeff and I were talking about. There's a lot of Cantex started on Empire Central.
Yeah.
We started over there. A lot of good real estate coming out of that little building over there.
Yeah. Jeff he'd be like, "Man, just take your laptop home every night." Because there were a lot of smash and grabs down there.
Yeah. We had that. We got broken into a ton.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. It was fun. I really enjoyed, I learned a lot from Jeff, even in those I was there for 7 years, but even in the early years, like just how to run a business and how to think about P&L and how to think about, getting revenue and watching the expenses. And he was a budget hawk on the expenses. And he just still does, but had a lot of business savvy and was really good at a lot of different things, like training brokers, and was a good salesperson, but also was an excellent investor. And I was like, "Man, I want to learn all this stuff from Jeff, the master."
Yeah.
Because back then there weren't a lot of brokers that were buying buildings,
No.
He was probably, and Mr. Lynn obviously owned a lot of stuff, but he was 85 years old, for as young as Jeff was. I can't even think of anybody who was doing it like he was.
Well, my perception of it, a lot of it was that Jeff was buying them, and like Mark was buying them with him, but Jeff was like
he was
spearheading it.
Yeah, he was the sponsor, even though they didn't do it like that.
Yeah, they didn't do it like that, but that's Jeff was running that show, and Because it's funny. I remember we'd have like a, because I was managing all the properties, and we'd have like a call, and it'd be like, Mark would be like, all right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
That was about it.
Yeah.
That was about all the input Mark had. Mark trusted Jeff just to, hey, man, y'all got it, He'd be on the call, but I think he was just, kind of checking in.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
But he trusted Jeff on all that stuff.
Yep,
so,
he did. Yeah. The market was terrible.
Yep.
2010, it was the bottom of the barrel. It had fallen out in 08 and 09, but it was tough times.
Yeah, it's still laying dead on the street out there. Because that's what I started in October of 10.
That's right. Yeah.
And golly, there's so many vacant buildings.
Yeah.
I remember when I used to track availables, when I started, I had, I think, 14 or 15 pages when I would print my active availables. Yeah. And then I remember like towards the end of my career, it was like 7.
Yeah.
Like
just the attrition, the leasing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. I've heard you say too. I mean, remember when people would be like, hey, I want to buy a 20 or 30,000 foot building. You're like, oh, sweet, man. I'll be back tomorrow with 15 options.
Yeah.
They're all $40 a foot. Which one do you want to go take a look at?
I mean, you in your role now, you probably see that request every day, and you're like,
call you if I see something.
Here's one. It's really expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of I will call you if I see something.
Right.
Now,
Right.
It's completely different. But
so at Mercer Company, we moved to Greenway.
Yep.
Greenway. Did you make it to back to 3030?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was funny because when I first started at Robert Lynn, we were at 3030 LBJ, suite 1600.
And we moved into that suite.
Same exact suite.
Yeah.
So I've done 2 tours of duty, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the Club Court building.
Yeah.
My kids still think I worked there because they drive by and they're like, is that where you work, Daddy? I'm like, nah, I hadn't worked there in a while now, but I still think I'm there.
That's where have the Dickies lunch.
Yep.
That's where you worked off your gambling.
That's right. Yep. Dickies lunch. Free ice cream.
Yeah.
Yep. Right there.
Yeah. We were playing roulette or we were playing blackjack, and like you kept pressing. You're like, Jeff, I'm going to need to borrow some money.
Yeah.
This one.
Well, I told him about, because we used to love to go to Shreveport or Windstar or even the Vegas Boondoggles a few times. But I told Jeff, I was like, hey, man, I heard about this betting strategy in blackjack where when you lose your hand, you double your bet the next time. You never really make a bunch of money, but you get to stay in the game for a long time is what I've heard. And he's like, well, let's try it. Like, all right, well, first bet is $10, lose it. $20, lose it. $40, lose it. $80, lose it. And then I get in like 160 and I'm like, and Jeff's sitting next to me. He's like, well, we got to keep going. And I'm like, I don't have any more cash. I think we got up to like $400 or $500. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, man, what happens if Jeff loses all this? Eventually we got it back. But he's like, I don't think that strategy works. It's fun, man. A lot of fun times.
Yeah, that's what we were talking before we started here earlier. I just remember we went and saw Wolf of Wall Street in Tahoe one night. We're like, let's go see a movie. So we went and saw Wolf of Wall Street, what a wild movie. But what I thought was so funny about it was how they did Steve Madden's IPO. And remember, we were walking out of the movie and Jeff goes, man, is Steve Madden even around? And you look down and you're like, you're wearing Steve Madden shoes right now.
I was like, those are Steve Madden shoes?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So funny.
Yeah.
We were in Tahoe this summer with the family, and I was like, hey, we got to go into this casino and walk around. Walked in there and was like, man, it felt like 12 years ago.
Yeah.
The old Mercer Company top producer trip.
Yeah.
So funny.
All right. So we're, back at 3030 and then you go to the corporate world.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So I was with Jeff for 7 years, and like I said, an amazing run. Learned another MBA in commercial real estate. Yeah. Bought buildings together, and he encouraged me to buy my first building on my own, which was awesome.
That's the one you flipped, right?
Yeah. So
that's the one you almost got killed on. Didn't Joby back into? You were on the ladder.
Oh yes, yeah,
wasn't that?
Yeah.
I do
remember that.
You almost got thrown off a ladder off of a roof, right?
I'd totally forgotten about that. Yeah, almost died in my first real estate investment. That would not have been good. My wife would have been like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, no, that's kind of a cool story that I think people need to hear because a lot. It's funny. The other day we had a broker bring us a deal, and it was like $1 million deal. I go, why don't you just buy this?
Yeah.
Like, for us to start an engine on a deal like that now, it's like we're kind of past that. I'm like, why don't you just buy this?
Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Yeah.
And
it was awesome. It was a 10,000 foot building on Denton Drive, and I had just sold one for almost identical for $50 a foot, and this one hit the market for $40 a foot.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the perfect seller story, like third generation owners, they didn't want it. They didn't own anything else in Dallas. The broker who was on the listing didn't do industrial at all, and they just kind of, you could tell they wanted to just get rid of it.
Yeah.
And the heirs, I think, were like, just give me the cash. I don't want the bricks and mortar.
Right.
2,000 miles away from where we live. And so I hit the market and ran into Jeff, man, we got to buy this building. And he's like, well, how much is it? And I told him, he's like, man, why don't you just buy it? Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay.
I've never taken the trailer wheels off.
Yeah, I've never done this before. You've always partnered with me.
Yeah.
He's like, man, I'll show you how to do it. You got the cash, just go do it. You know? And it was the best advice ever, man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been a Grant Cardone, it's been a 10X return.
Yeah.
I mean, so I held it for 2 months, and then you guys were trying to sell Rogers. And
that is the Mercer Company.
The Mercer Company.
Merry-go-round.
Yep.
Rogers Road.
All those tenants still there?
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah. Danny Spencer's still back there. Mike Pound's still there. Or KW.
KW.
I don't know who's up in the front. Yeah. But they just sold again.
Okay.
On another internal Mercer Company 1031.
Yeah.
But you're talking about your 1-800-Flowers deal. You had like $1,500.
Yeah.
So Roger, that was my first deal I ever bought.
Rogers.
Rogers. Yeah. And I was 23. And Jeff's like, hey, you can buy this building with me and you can manage it. I was like, okay, cool. How much do I need to put in?
Yeah.
He goes, well, can you put in like $3,000? I was like, I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Wells Fargo on Airport Freeway in Irving.
Okay.
And I was like, can I get a personal line of credit? And I got a personal line of credit for $3,000, put it into that building. And when we sold it to you, I got a check for $40,000.
Man, that's awesome.
And I'd owned it for 10 years and cash flowed it.
Yeah.
And got management fees on it.
Yeah.
And
that was a parlay for sure.
That was a hell of a real estate deal for me. So,
yeah. No money down, man. That's your
no
Carlton
money
sheets.
Down. There you
Got
go.
you going.
Everybody acts like it does. It can't happen. It can.
Happens.
It can.
Yeah. Yeah. So I bought Rogers in 2017, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a little bit earlier. But yeah, that cash flowed for a while. And then Jeff called me in 2020. He's like, hey, would you sell that back to me? I got 1031 money. So it's like, man, you always told me everything but the wife and kids are for sale. So make me an offer.
Yeah.
And he made me an offer, and I was able to flip it into a deal that we own currently. So
that's cool.
Down on Anjon Drive, where Site One Landscape Supply is. But and obviously I learned a million things from Jeff, but he was always kind of pushing you to do a little bit more. You know? And I've heard Kobe Bryant talk about that too. It's like, man, if you just improve 1% a day, and Jeff was phenomenal at that. Just, hey, man, just raise the bar a little bit. Just add another 5 pounds on your max and get after it.
It's compounding effect.
Yeah.
It all adds up, man. So,
but I mean, I was signing the lease on the new deal that we own, and another amazing financial provision story. But so I'm signing the lease, and we got a 12-year lease from the tenant, and we had just signed our kids up to go to private school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there signing it, and I'm realizing, man, this lease expires when my son graduates from high school.
Oh, man.
And it's just a provision every month,
Yeah.
So obviously the Lord and Jeff Mercer, but another awesome story.
Yeah, I think then Jeff sold that building to Keenan, who had a 1031.
Rogers?
Yeah.
Okay.
and Keenan and Jeff. But Jeff is in that. Jeff is on his third round of ownership on that building.
He used to joke with it might have been Phil Schiebel or somebody. He's like, man, let's just keep selling each other the same buildings. You buy, I buy. And
just keep cycling
through them.
Yeah. It's something Latham always pushes me to do, and I always forget it, but it's to always require a roofer on every building I sell.
Yeah.
And to be, whenever it comes back up again.
Yep. So not a purchase option, but just a roofer?
Yeah. Just
do you deed restrict it?
Just a deed restriction where it's like, hey, you got to call me if you're going to sell it.
Yeah.
Or a ROFO, I guess, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And get another shot at it, I guess. I need to do that. I just keep forgetting about it because I've sold some buildings where I'm like, I don't want to sell this, but I have to because it's too good.
Yeah.
And but I need to start baking that in there.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't encumber the seller, right? I mean,
all I gotta do is just call you when they're going to sell it, and you can say I don't want to buy it, or I'd buy that.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
so you make the transition to Cushman. So you've kind of been in the boutique shop forever, and you go to the big corporate world. So what was the major differences there?
Oh man, completely different.
Yeah.
So I'd spent 13 years at that point, street brokering, and I just was like, man, I want to try something different and go see how the other side of the aisle lives. And I had much respect for CBRE and JLL and Cushman. I was like, I wonder how they do things, and how do they win corporate business, and how do they service corporate business. And so I was, when I was kind of looking around, we have the benefit, I tell people in our business, that you work with everybody. So you kind of know, like, hey, if there was ever a need for me to go do something different, or I wanted to, I'd go here, here, and here. And I'd probably shy away from these groups over here.
Yeah.
And I went and I looked at like who all was at Cushman, and I was like, man, there are some phenomenal people there. Gary Collette and Jean Russo. She and I had done a bunch of deals together, and so she introduced me to Rand Holman, who was running the office at the time, and another guy named Brett Bunnett. I think is a tech guy.
Yeah.
And they had just like assembled, like Cushman had merged with DTZ and Cassidy Turley, and so they had just assembled kind of this behemoth, and there's a lot of good energy behind it. And I was like, man, there's not any bad apples on the team, and the team wasn't huge. Like CBRE, I could name like 40 brokers.
Right.
I was like, that's who I can name. There's probably another 20 there that I can't name that are working on corporate stuff. So a lot of fish in the pond. I was like, man, I'm already leaving I'm leaving a small shop and going to a big one. I don't want to get, swallowed up.
Yeah.
And so Cushman had, I think, 10 or 12 brokers on the team at the time. And I was like, man, I want to go there. And nobody working the market that I was working. I was like, I wonder what it would be like if I just had a different business card. And that was great. I mean, a lot of, not as much inbound business as you would think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of it's relationship, probably the best bang for your buck is going to the convention every year and meeting brokers in other markets and trying to network and getting your name in front of brokers because it's still kind of the 80-20 rule where, 20% of guys are doing 80% of the work, and the guys that are really good at winning corporate business they're doing that all day, every day. They might have 3 or 4 accounts, and you hope to kind of get on their Rolodex.
You'd be their Dallas guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would joke, you put on the catcher's mitt, send me the deal. But that was another great experience. Just learned kind of corporate real estate. I wasn't really chasing multi-market stuff, and I still kind of tried to stay true to the roots. And I was like, man, if every year I can get a little bit from the inbound business, and it'll just be icing on the cake. But I did have one inbound deal that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I was like, man, this is like a decade-long type of win.
Yeah.
But for the most part, a lot of them they're diced up pretty good by the time you get on the closing sheet.
Yeah, I could imagine it gets very diluted.
Yeah.
And
I saw a press release yesterday where there was a team, they closed 120,000 of a deal, and there were 9 brokers.
it's so funny, the traded things, and you see it. It's like, what did anybody really make on that?
Yeah. It's like, man, it's like hyenas on just a piece of meat.
I remember one time I got an OM and there was like 10 brokers listed on it. I go, who do I even call?
Yeah.
Like, who's running this?
Who's the single point of contact?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's definitely fee delusion at those things. So and then
so it was great experience, but I think after every 5 years or so, I kind of get an itch, and I had hired a young teammate in 2021, and that was going really well too. And so and I'm like, man, I'm coming up on 20 years in the business, and do I want to keep doing this? I mean, I know it's a great opportunity and a great industry, but you go out to the same sandbox every day, and you're like, man, have I uncovered everything I can uncover out there? And but really enjoyed, again, kind of getting back to the training and discipleship and mentorship of young brokers, and had hired a young teammate, and that was going extremely well. And that was kind of where more of the like fulfillment in my business was coming from. And don't get me wrong, I love the financial freedom that brokerage provides, but again, I enjoy the teamwork aspect and the training. And
in my mind, you've always kind of been the player coach. You've always loved like running that part of it. I mean, you ran our action group for a long time and all that stuff, and you loved being able to help someone solve a problem. So I think you're in such a great spot now in my mind. Like when I heard you took that job, I was like, man, that's like perfect. That's like a great thing to mold at a great, not institutional, but not totally boutique. Like Holt Lunsford's like, it's kind of a class of its own, I would say, in brokerage in Dallas. I feel like you're either really boutique-y or really corporate, and they have kind of the best of both worlds there. So
I agree.
And it seems like that's a division they didn't really have,
right?
And I think they've been trying to figure that out for a while. But so how did that all happen? How did you end up over there?
Last summer I was kind of like, there was some turmoil at Cushman, turnover in leadership, and they were starting to take the company in a direction. I was like, man, I don't know. They did some things I literally was like, I don't know if I could work here. You know what I mean? Just ethically and anyways, so I started really wrestling with that, and I'm like, I really enjoy my teammate. And then I was like, well, what if I had 10 of these guys? What if I had 10 young brokers? And then I'm like, well, where could I do that? Or do I need to go open my own business and start, just put a flag in the ground and do my own thing? And so Allie and I were kind of, chatting about that and brainstorming that. And then Jim Bryce called in November of last year. He's like, hey, man, we'd love for you to come over here and run our industrial tenant rep division. And I was like, man, I'm all ears, man. Holt Lunsford has always been a guy personally I've respected and admired, and a man of faith, but also, very, very good at his craft. I mean, just about every facet of an industrial deal or an office deal, he's kind of touched, management, leasing, development, capital markets, raising money. I mean, just everything down the line. He's been involved in the capital stack, the development, the leasing, like I said, everything. And I was like, man, this is an amazing opportunity. And it was when Jim Bryce described it to me, he was like, man, we have 2 guys on the team that are hustling, but they just need some direction, and you can inherit them, and then we'll give you what you need to hire and train, and obviously you can still broker your own deals, and here's the upside. And I was like, man, this is my dream job. And it was literally like what Allie and I were talking about doing on my own, but a 30-year platform and well-capitalized and
resources in place.
And I mean, all this stuff. Like you start your own deal, it's like all of a sudden I got to build a website and I got to hire a graphic designer.
Or in Jeff's case, plunge a toilet.
I heard that story too. I remember that. It's like, oh man, stuff they don't teach you.
No, I mean they have. I mean the amount of market knowledge. I mean, like we tap Holt Lunsford all the time for MLAs on a project, and it's just the data's.
Yeah,
the data is kind of the new deadly point in our industry.
Yeah. And so, they made me an offer, and I think it was like 48 hours, and we worked it out. And I was like, man, I'm in. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, just the opportunity and the people, and privately held company. I had worked for, at that point I had worked for 2 smaller privately held companies, and then worked for the third largest brokerage firm in the world, and Cushman was great, and I could have stayed there till I was 70. Because the people are still phenomenal. The local team is still incredible. The opportunity is still there, but I've always had these itches for kind of leadership, and and there's nothing wrong with being 70 years old and still brokering deals, and people love it and they still do it, and they get out of bed for it. And but I've always enjoyed like I said, the mentorship and leadership. So this is
that has always been your passion. I could always tell and then when I saw you took that position, I was like, that's like perfect for you.
Yeah.
So I was really happy for you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Yeah.
So
better than anybody.
Yeah. And it's great. Like, we're working with a lot of your guys now and stuff constantly. You got a lot of really good dudes over there, and it's but they're and me personally, I've gotten to benefit from that firm because Narduzzi and Angie have brought over tons of stuff. That I think what's really cool at all that is you've had so much perspective. I've never really had perspective, right? Because I haven't really worked anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I worked for Jeff, but that's like, in a way, that's the entrepreneurial starter kit at Mercer Company, right?
Right.
And then, but there's things that are done. There's probably things you learned at Cushman that, maybe Holt Lunsford doesn't have, and you just take that little dial this way with this little thing and that little thing, and you can kind of. So I think that's the one thing that I've missed is being able to have perspective on how other people do business, because I've always just ran my own business, and so that's cool that you've gotten to kind of see the whole array of what it is, from 5 people on Empire Central to 5,000 plus people. So that's I think that gives you a lot of knowledge. So it's awesome. Well, here's something I always like to ask on this is what was your most awkward cold call you ever made?
Oh yeah. I've thought about this. It wasn't really a cold call, but I was out kind of doing some market research. At Robert Lynn, you drive the market, and you'd write down building owners and building tenants, and then you try and research who to call on. And so this particular day, I had a 5-speed Honda Accord, manual transmission, because I was super cheap, and I was like, man, this thing gets good gas mileage, And so I'm driving around, and I'm bebopping in these parking lots, and I go to pull out on Beltline, and this car, I see him pull in before I go to pull out, and he comes up right up on me, and I'm on this hill, and when you're in a standard transmission, you don't want to roll back at all. And so he's like right up on me. I'm like, man, if I pop the clutch, I'm going to roll into him. Well, he gets out of his car and he knocks on my window. And so I put the car in park and I roll the window down, and he's like, hey man, I saw what you did. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I saw what you did. I was like, well, what did I do? He goes, you saw her car, you pulled in there, and then you saw me and you pulled out and left. I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? And he pulls his sunglasses down. He goes, are you effing around on my wife? And I was like, totally shocked. I went from total shock to scared out of my mind. Because think about, like, if you suspected that.
Yeah.
And then you thought you caught him? The guy.
Yeah.
I was nowhere near I was just in my car the whole time. Just imagine if you suspected that. I'm like, this is how 2020 episodes start.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the news at 5.
Yeah, this is local real estate broker murdered.
Yeah,
cold blood.
Oh my gosh! So how did you defuse it?
Well, I had all these business cards. I had all this paperwork here. I'm like, no, man, I'm in the real estate business, and here's my driver's license. And if I was the guy, I would be showing you all this stuff, and really tried to like
just calm him
down, man.
Yeah.
And so finally, he let me go, and he was like, all right, man, I believe you. And way before GPS, so I couldn't be like, man, you can track my phone. I'll show you. I don't even know who that is. And, you know, it's
he drove off and go, tell Sarah I said bye.
That's right. See you. Oh, man. So that was probably my most awkward moment. And then I was driving to meet Mark for lunch, and I get there, and I'm still just completely shaken up.
Yeah.
I'm just like shaking. I'm like scared out of my mind. Am I going to get murdered? And I get there and I tell Mark the story. He just starts dying laughing. I'm like, Mark, you're supposed to sympathize with me, man.
That is funny, man.
Yep. Yeah. So not really a cold call story. No dead bodies.
Well, that's a part of being on the street, though. Yeah. Some shit that's about to go down like you didn't expect.
Yeah.
So
funny, man.
Oh man, that is funny. So, well, let's talk about what's like kind of your unique deal, or your like kind of your walk-off home run deal of your career that, or it doesn't have to be that, but just a deal that you didn't see happening, or that just had some challenges, or give us that example.
Yeah, I think it's really the building ownership deal. Mm-hmm. I mean, that, when you look down at the sheet and the net profit, I was like, man, the net profit I made was not massive, but I'm like, this is after tax. I didn't have to split it with the house.
Yeah.
Significant. I took a risk, and like with Jeff pushing me on it, and it worked out, and it's been a major blessing. So that for sure is like my probably career walk-off deal.
Yeah. That's the cool thing about it. It's probably not the biggest commission check you ever made or anything like that, but it's just something that was very impactful in your career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of harkened back at that time. I was like, obviously Jeff showed me the ropes, and my family friend, Kent Halra, who was buying the rental houses, I'm like, man, he showed me this, and it's been like a 10-year come to fruition, and here it is actually working the way you'd planned and hoped, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
My favorite brokerage deal was one I did at Cushman. It was an inbound referral.
Yeah.
But and typically these inbound referrals are like, hey, they need 100,000 feet. You go work with them, and at the end of the day, they're like, hey, we toured. We actually need 20,000 feet. And you're like,
hey, we're splitting this 5 ways.
Yeah. But this deal came from Indianapolis, and got connected with the guy, and he's like, hey, they are like assembling this location and a few others, and so we need 300,000 feet, and so we go tour buildings. They fly in town, go tour. We only toured 4 buildings, and they knew exactly. They were very unusual, because most of these out-of-town requirements, they come in, they're like, we don't know where we want to be. We're just going to tour for 3 days, show us everything that's on the market. Yeah. We did multiple of those where you're just putting 200 miles in your car in one day, touring everything.
The whole Metroplex.
The whole Metroplex.
Yeah.
Show us everything that's over 100,000 feet, and you're like, there's 50 options.
Yeah.
But they had done their labor studies. They knew exactly where they wanted to be. They were like, all of our temp laborers coming from Mesquite area, so we want to be in that area. So we toured 4 buildings, and we get to the tour, and it's a 300,000 foot requirement. And they were like, well, how much is that back building back there? And the broker's like, oh, it's another 300. And then the 4 executives kind of come over here and huddle, and they're like, hey, I think we need both of these buildings. And I was like, yes.
Sir, we can do that for you.
We can do that, yeah. Quote Spellman, quoting Ghostbusters, no job is too big, no fee is too big.
That's right.
One of Spellman's favorite lines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so we ended up making that deal. It was a phenomenal deal. I mean, the biggest commission of my career. Just a huge win. And then they had 4 other locations that they needed to get out of. And so they were like, hey, we need to sublease all of these locations. Yeah. And they were like kind of annex deals, where you're like, we need another 30,000 feet. And so just kind of hodgepodge leases. And we were able to get all those subleases off the books, just get them all.
That's great.
So
yeah, that's awesome.
And the company, they make 99% of the world's sports trading cards.
Oh, okay.
GC Packaging is the name of the company. But yeah, it was a very fun deal to work on.
That was always there's a trading card company that I did a deal for, and it's like, hi, you forget about all these people that need a warehouse.
Yeah.
Like they need a warehouse to print those things and cut them and all those things. But that's where it has to happen somewhere. So it comes out of the warehouse.
Yeah, we were walking through their warehouse, and I was like, God, man, I thought this was a dead industry. I thought, and the CFO is like, no, it's never been bigger. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, when you were growing up, they used to print millions of cards, and now they print a finite amount, so it's almost like a currency. You know? And then they show you what number on the card stack that you have, and so there's a lot of traders and speculators that are like trying to get their hands on. Like they didn't even know, they don't know what they're printing because they're super. Super high security. And
because it is like a currency now. You get the right card and number, and it's worth a lot of money. Millions, so they gotta control that.
And they were like, we didn't even know, but we printed the Luka Doncic rookie card here, and it's sold on the secondary market for like $4 million.
Holy.
Just crazy. Who buys it? It's just rich speculators, People like similar to that people that buy like tickets, that buy season tickets for the Rangers or something. They just they're hoping the team makes the playoffs.
Right.
Just speculators, but
that's not, but it's cool. That's the cool thing about this business. You get to see how so many different things are done, and, I don't think you get that in many other asset classes. I mean, office is just people doing office stuff, right? But you go into someone's warehouse and you see like, man, that's pretty interesting, that's how you make money, you know? And that's something I've always enjoyed about it. It's just kind of the fascinating ways people make money out the back of a warehouse. So
no two deals are the same. No two companies are the same. It's something different every day.
It is. Well, another thing I always like to ask, what are kind of the habits and routines that you've kind of always instilled in yourself that have kind of just grounded you and kept you successsul?
For sure. So probably 10 years ago, I did the first like chronological read through the Bible in a year deal. And I had read through most of the books kind of piecemeal throughout my life up to that point, but I'd never sat down and read Genesis to Revelation, like start to finish in chronological order, the way they think it was really written instead of the way that it's organized. And that was incredibly impactful. And so I try to do that every year. I'm behind for the last 2 years, but I'm about to finish the program again. And then there's a program called the Bible Recap, which I'll plug, but it's you just listen to a podcast and for 7 or 8 minutes, it helps you learn. It teaches you like what you just read about, which is pretty awesome.
So I've been trying to read the Bible this year in a little program. What I like about the one I'm on is it gives you like, I guess the Old Testament's probably about twice the size of the New Testament. And it gives you 2 sections of Old Testament and then a New Testament. Man, they killed a ton of people in the Old Testament. I mean, it's just like, and they killed 200,000 people.
It's like Game of Thrones, man.
It is just brutal, man. It's so I'm a little behind on it right now, but it's something I've been trying to do this year because I've never gotten all the way, never gotten all the way through it, both sides. I do kind of skim over whenever they start going over the lineage of people. I'm like, okay, like I'm never going to remember any of these names. But that's something I'm doing too right now. So I want to check out that podcast because sometimes it gets kind of deep, and you're like, man, like, and the names are so close. You kind of like start, Elijah, Eliza, and it's like, you kind of just start mixing people up a little bit, or at least I do. So I want to listen to that podcast to help me summarize that.
It's good. You can do it at your own pace, and the summer I was not as disciplined, and there's nothing that says you have to finish it a year. I've had that before. I'm like, oh man, I'm 30 chapters behind. I got to read all these this weekend. You end up blazing through it just to check the box. And so I'm kind of
not the point, right?
This isn't like cleaning your room. It's let's take the time and really understand what it's saying and try to apply it. And so,
well, what about a book other than the Bible that has been very influential to you?
I mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm actually reading that again for the 4th or 5th time right now. Just a great story. A single dad raising 2 kids and all of the stuff that they get into, and a lot of similarities to my dad. And so that's probably my favorite fiction book. But I'm reading a book right now. It's called 10X is Easier Than 2X.
Yeah.
And it's not a Grant Cardone, but it's these entrepreneurs. And it talks a lot about how if you want to get to 10X, all of the things you have to stop doing to get there, because 2X, you're probably going to keep doing a lot of the same stuff. But, and it's a tad redundant right now. But, but the premise is amazing.
Yeah.
And so
no, I think those are things entrepreneurs always get stuck in. Is like you got to let some things go at some point. To there's another book, I think it's called like What Got You Here Won't Get You There. But that's something that I kind of have to to grow this company. I've got to be able to like have those people in place to do certain things that I always did in the beginning. In the beginning it was me, then it was just me and Isabella, and then and it's just evolved and and so, but it's hard to let go of certain things. As any business owner. So,
and I'll plug one more that I loved in the last 5 years. It's called Endurance by. It's a story of a guy named Ernest Shackleton, and he left Great Britain in like the early 1900s with 30 people, and their goal was we're going to sail to Antarctica, and we're going to be the first group to ever cross Antarctica on foot. And I won't give the end away, but they get down there and they get stuck in the ice pack, and like the leadership skills of this dude would like surpass anything you could possibly imagine today. But it's an amazing true story.
Yeah.
The book was written in the 70s, so it's not super new, but I read it for the first time about 18 months ago. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Can't put it down.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
There's books like that. That's always cool when you can find one like that. There's me and Barrett were out at the ranch this past weekend, and there was a book Jeff and I read called A Long Way Gone.
Okay.
And it's stories of a child soldier in Sierra Leone.
Oh,
and I showed it to Barrett. You've probably seen it.
I remember Jeff talking about it. Yeah.
I showed it to Barrett, and I was like, dude, you need to read this.
Yeah.
Like, this is unbelievable. I can't believe that book's not a movie. I was like, this thing is just unbelievable. You got to read it. It sounds like Endurance should be a movie, too.
Yeah. They probably made it into a movie a long time ago that I don't know about. But
Well, what's something unique about Adam Curran that most people don't know?
Man, probably 2 things. I did eventually end up getting my pilot's license, which is pretty cool. But I have not flown in probably 20 years as pilot in command, as they say. So I would not get in the plane with me right now, unless you want to get home safely.
Only if you're a passenger.
Right. Yep. I will fly as a passenger. Maybe someday I'll get back into it, but my wife hates it. She hates the thought of me doing it. She flew with me one time, and she's like, it's not for me.
Yeah. It's kind of like riding a motorcycle.
Yep.
Those planes that you're probably flying.
Yep. And then this is cool. So I did get to kind of tie a bow on the ministry ambition. So about 5 years ago, I got asked to serve as an elder at our church, and so that's something that's really cool that I get to do on the side. So just a lay elder, where they have staff elders and lay elders, and so I've gotten to preach a few times, and that's been awesome. And so,
really, you did get you're like an official preacher, right?
Licensed.
You're a licensed preacher. You can perform ceremonies.
I've done ceremonies. I did Brent Lanfried's wedding. I don't know if you remember that or not, but only done a handful since then. But
That's awesome. So, well, man, this has been great.
Yeah,
just
it's been
strolling down memory lane.
Yeah, for sure.
Lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings.
Yep.
A lot of good memories, man. A lot of good times. So, really excited to see you in this new role, man. Like I was saying earlier, I think it's a great home for you.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what you do with that side, because I think that's a big part that Holt Lunsford can develop and really make a serious business unit for them. So that's really cool, man.
Yeah.
So,
well, likewise, man. Love seeing you doing what you're doing, and exercising your passions too for music and arts and podcast and real estate investment.
Yeah, it's fun, man. It's it just kind of all blossomed and just kept going. And, it's fun. Jeff and I buy buildings together and stuff, and sometimes we buy buildings together, we don't, but it's something we get to always just, 6:45 this morning, I'm talking to him on the way in and going over stuff. And it's just kind of cool. I was telling Jeff too, it's very interesting how I said, as I've been interviewing all these people, I was like, there's so many people that you've, that are connected to you. I don't think you understand how many times your name comes. Jeff. Jeff is like your name comes into this circulation of people that have kind of gotten their real estate career off of you. And
he's like the Kevin Bacon of commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Except for people who are 3 degrees away from him.
Yeah, that's right.
You should get Ryan Wilson on here down in Austin.
Yeah, I should. No, we I talked to Ryan a couple days ago actually. So we buy some buildings together down there with him, and
nice.
So but this has been fun, man. Like I was telling you earlier, and it's just kind of it's fun to get to document. And, it wasn't anything that I thought that would really kind of turn into what it is now. And, like I said, I don't really prep for these things. It's just, it flows pretty naturally for me, but it's fun. I want to make a real documentary out of this of these are the top guys in real estate in Dallas, which is top market in the world, so.
It's fun,
it's been fun.
Glad you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's cool to hear other people's stories too, and how they obviously no two deals are the same, no two people's stories are the same, and everyone's different. It's cool hearing everyone's backgrounds. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. So to speak.
That's what Clay Balch called us the other day. He goes, "Hey, P1 from day one." He goes, "I actually looked it up. P1 is not exclusive to the ticket."
Oh,
so
really?
I was like, oh, okay. So he goes, so I felt like I could say that.
Yeah.
So that was pretty funny. So, all right, man. Well, Adam Curran, everybody.
Yep.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jeremy.
Yep.
Appreciate it, man.
See you.